The mayor may be joining us electronically later, but will not be in person, we know that. And Sherry is attending to the water board meeting, and they also have a truth and taxation hearing scheduled at 6 p.m. So we anticipate her joining us probably in the general meeting a little bit later. So we will get going with our agenda tonight. Item 1.1 is a review of this evening's agenda. Is there any items or concerns over tonight's agenda?
Really concerned it's long.
Yes. Nathan, if you could work on that.
He's trying.
Yeah. All right, we'll go on to item 1.2, which is our future agenda items. Is there anything right now that members of the council would like to bring up for future agenda items? And since we just got through saying that it's exactly long. Jared, anything for you for future agenda?
Nope, not now.
Okay, thank you. Item 1.3 is a review of our leadership task list. I know, Nathan, you had mentioned obviously trying to knock a few things off there. Is there anything you would like to update on that item right now?
No, but we will talk a little bit about it on the 16th.
Okay, perfect. Okay, with that, we'll move on to item number 2.1, which is a review of the tentative Herman City fiscal year 2021-2022 budget. Alan?
Well, we approved it last week.
There's not.
That's
Agenda
not
I
the
have.
Did I have the wrong one? I apologize. That is the one that opened up for me. I may have been mistaken. My apologies. Thank you. Oh, I actually have it right in front of me. I don't even know why I'm doing that. So my apologies. Item 2.1. Let's go with this one. This one looks better. It's actually shorter than the other one I was looking at, so that does look better. My apologies, everyone. 2.1, Public Works Facility Building Update. So Justin Edwards and Cody Stromberg, our Deputy Chief.
Yeah, so if you recall, it's been a few months since we last discussed this, but we had obviously some fairly major changes that we were making. So it took us some time to do that, and we're bringing the results of that back. I do want to introduce, we have Scott Henriksen with GSBS, Brian Jacobson with GSBS, and then Johnny Holmeshead with Layton Construction here as well. So if we get in any questions or anything that they can address, then we can ask them. But so tonight, kind of the gist of this is just to report the work we've done since our last meeting. And then kind of the main recommendation is basically what we'll be looking for is just report, and then also we're gonna step back a little bit, look at some funding. We understand the cost of this and the obligations the city currently has, and so we understand that we'll wanna step back and look at that. So tonight is just to give you a report update. You can give us feedback, obviously on what we're reporting. So we'll just go ahead and get started. So just a quick overview. You're probably well aware of where the site is, but it's off Rosecrest Road and 129th South, so just kind of southwest here of City Hall. This is giving you an outline of when we presented to council, November of last year, and then February and April of this spring. And then we'll pass some of this, so Cody and I will kind of tag team this since a lot of the updates were in regards to HPD.
This is probably where we had the most significant changes from the last time you saw this project. As you recall, when we started down this road, almost 2 years ago now, the idea or the concept at the time was to evaluate a potential public safety building that was standalone from this building on the adjacent property to City Hall, and then also some considerations for public safety spacing at the Public Works facility or the planned Public Works facility. So that was the exercise that we went through with our architects, and they did a significant amount of work as we started looking at programming. The ultimate task was to evaluate what our staffing and programming and spatial needs would be at full build out, which based on our calculations ended somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 sworn officers for the police department plus support staff, etc. So that was the exercise. As we came and presented that to the council and had some feedback and discussion, and looked at really the feasibility of those two projects together. The decision was made at the time to kind of take the public safety building and put that on a shelf. That this site and the building that was on it and what was there just probably was not the best decision in that location at this time. What that resulted in is us having to do a combination of the two programs to identify the pieces of each program that were more critical for the needs of our public safety and specifically for the police department. There were elements that were unique to both projects that are more immediate and then things that were more long-term. And so the exercise that we went through in trying to combine these programs as we were working with GSBS was to identify those pieces that were the most critical from the public safety building and then incorporate that programming into the public works facility. And so you'll see in the left column there is the original program that incorporates both buildings for a total of 94,000 square feet, just over 94,000 square feet between the two buildings. And again, remember that was planned for full build out. And then the updated program you'll see on the right for specifically the public works facility that brings us to just over 51,000 square feet. And you can see there's a little bit of difference, reduction in office space. The shop space is, for the public safety side, the shop space is where we would store equipment, vehicles, tactical vehicles, and some of those assets as well. And then some reduction in evidence space from what was planned in the public safety building to what now exists in the public works facility programming. So that's kind of where the combination of the programming landed, and that was really the crux of the exercise that we've gone through over the last couple of months with GSBS and late construction.
So if I'm reading that right, a $6,000 square foot increase at the public works facility replaces a 45,000 square foot facility.
Correct.
As a phase.
As
It's
a
probably not
phase,
the full-
correct.
It's not the full build out.
As a phase, and we talked about some we've had some discussions about other options as we grow for not only phasing but potential more precinct or substation type buildings in the future. Those will be incorporated into future planning, and so we're able to accommodate some of those needs. Obviously, there was a reduction in what was programmed at the public works facility in order to be able to bring over some of those more critical programming needs from the public safety building, and so the replacement of those programming elements in the public works facility, then we would look at future phasing or future other facilities to accommodate those needs.
If I can ask one more question before we move on. How would this square footage impact the HPD presence in this building?
That's something we're discussing actively. There's obviously some concern for wanting to maintain some element of PD presence in this building, but for the large part, this facility would entirely replace the operations downstairs, potentially with the exception of some administrative functions for the PD that might remain here. It's not really something we've nailed down yet, but for the most part, that space downstairs would be recaptured for other city departments, which was the intent as we programmed this building years and years ago under our previous law enforcement provider. That was always the intent, was that space that we occupied down there was always temporary, and that would be recaptured for additional growth space for engineering and planning and other city departments in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple of slides that are in your packet to just kind of show how we incorporated some of the changes to the programming. This was all done by GSBS and incorporating what we moved and what we adapted to the Public Works Facility program. There's not a whole lot of change as far as the functionality of the building. We didn't change the footprint. More it was capturing some of the space that had been set aside for storage and some training areas. Conversion, a significant amount of this space was originally planned to be left as shelled space. And so there would obviously be some recapture of that shelled space that would be finished out under this plan. One of the biggest additions is the basement of the public works, the public safety side of the public works building. We had, in order to accommodate the needs that we have there, would result in the full build out of the basement, and all of those costs are detailed in your packet as well. And again, just kind of an illustration of how the layout might change as we incorporate some of the public safety building aspects, specifically administration and records functions and evidence storage into the single facility. This is the level 2 again, where we're recapturing what was originally planned to be shelled space on the second floor, what would now be filled out as office space. And incorporate an on-site emergency operations center for our emergency management team.
Yeah, so essentially, as Cody said, the building footprint essentially stayed the same. The only thing that did change was that police vehicle area. It expanded one bay to allow for the Sally Port and some other storage needs that they had. And so essentially, nothing else changed except for the lengthening of that one building. We'll go into some cost estimate comparisons here based on the original. So the original estimate, and I will say we used basically the highest of the estimates. So when we had these cost estimates done, we had it done by two different companies. So Parametrics and Layton both did cost analysis on both of the layouts and programming. And so the original estimate was just under $25 million. And now with the updated changes to the facility, we're looking at just about $29 million. So there's, about a $4 or $5 million increase. There's a cost breakdown. If you recall in the last presentation, we kind of broke it down so that you could see how the cost of this building would be distributed through the different funds or departments in the city. And down there in the bottom table, you can see the general fund would be about $11.5 million of the total cost. HPD now, since they expanded, would be just over $14 million of the total cost. Water department would be about $1.8 million, and stormwater would be about $1 million. One of the other things we were tasked with was to look at alternatives to this project. I do want to say that obviously these alternatives are, we put some thought into them, a lot of thought. But I will say these are concept designs and fairly rough cost estimates. We haven't gone into the detail of programming and schematic design of these areas, but we have put a lot of thought and received input from contractors and others on costs. So moving forward, one of the things that we were looking at is the ability to build more buildings at our current public works facility site at Butterfield Park. And the shapes up there, Public Works, HPD, and then the smaller square would be animal services, to give them an area to currently they're using obviously the spaces that we have available to them, which don't necessarily meet the needs, and so we'd be looking at building them a facility as well. So the different colors on those shapes are different options that we could use, different areas we could put them. Obviously, they do impact our current facility. In each one of these locations where these buildings are, we do house materials or use that space currently. The green shade that you can see toward the top of the map is the floodplain for Rose Creek drainage. And so obviously no buildings can be placed within that area. So we're somewhat limited to the north end of the property. So the preliminary cost for these facilities, and we'll get into looking at some of the layouts, total cost would be just over $6 million is what our estimates would be. Public Works being just under $2 million of that. HPD, roughly 1.7. Animal Services would be around 700,000, and then there's significant site improvements that would be needed. We need power, sewer, water, communications. All of those things would need to be extended to these buildings as well. This cost does include a 4% inflation as well. based on the cost estimates, because we received them several months ago, and with cost of construction going up, we did include that. This does not include the FF&E for the buildings.
Justin, really quick, just so if you'll go back, I mean, those shaded that are identify each area. I mean, you have orange up by the arena, one identified HPD Public Works. Is that area designated as vehicle storage? I mean, what's the difference between the purple and the orange?
Right, so those are basically just different options and areas we could locate them, and so
Oh,
this is
okay, I
what the
got you.
layout of those buildings might look like.
Okay, thank you.
And so the shapes on there do represent the approximate size of the buildings, but those are essentially just different locations or options and where we could put those, on the site. And
So I'm just, out of curiosity, so we're saying we need an additional building for Public Works and for HPD, both on top of the space that's already there?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, and
But
so
this is alternative to what you just showed us on the other side.
correct, yeah, so
Okay.
we were asked to bring back alternatives to if we didn't do the Public Works facility site, what could we do as an alternative for some short-term, to fill some short-term needs?
Okay.
And so this is, what the result of that is, to use our current facility now and just expand those there. If you do remember, we talked about the need for it, and we showed pictures and identified, areas where, we're basically stacking people on top of people and vehicles and parking, and HPD really has no real good areas to park their equipment and function out of, and so this would help alleviate that, for a period of time. And so this is what kind of the layout of the buildings could look like. And so obviously this allows for parking and storage for HPD. It does give them some office space as well. And similar to that for Public Works. We did input department names there, just to fillers, but obviously there are options on who would go down there. This is just what we've identified as a need. And then also, add some office space for Public Works as well, to expand their, managers.
Can I interject one question really quick? In regards to the need for this, other than maybe the anecdotal sights of what I've seen there in the cluster, vehicles stopped in front of vehicles, on top of vehicles, do we have any, actual cases of call times being delayed, public safety issues, Chief or Deputy Chief, is there any specific comments about we've had difficulty responding to something or had a delayed response because of the configuration here?
There have been a couple, we try to mitigate that as best we can. We've come up with some alternatives for like key storage and whatnot, so that if we do have to access equipment, we can. Public Works has been very generous, to say the least. And keeping in mind that specifically when this building was constructed, as well as the park, a lot of our public safety functions operated out of facilities elsewhere in the county, right? So we didn't program any evidence storage, any processing, any vehicle storage, crash storage, the storage for our TRV or that heavy equipment. None of that was planned to ever be here. It was planned at other facilities throughout the county with our previous law enforcement provider. So it's important to note that as we stood up the HPD in 2018, there was zero additional infrastructure added to the city. We went through and stole everything that we could from other city departments to kind of get by. So there is definitely a critical need on the public safety side. But as far as specific incidences, there have been a couple of times where we've had to move cars to access equipment, but nothing that would drastically impact public safety, but it's certainly a risk.
It just, the idea that I'm pleased to hear that we don't have a specific incident where there was a critical incident because of a delay, but I would certainly not ever want that to happen. So I guess I'm just looking to quantify how big of a problem that really is, because that should impact what choices we make and speed that we act and things like that.
It's certainly a risk factor to consider. and I would say a substantial risk. We've done, I feel like, a pretty good job of mitigating that up until now, but
Well, it's not only police response, right, but it is public works response to, broken pipes or flooding or, stuff like that. They have to be able to respond quickly to emergencies in the
Right.
community as well.
absolutely.
So, okay, thank you.
We'll go back to the site plan. So as I mentioned, the locations of these buildings do impact some of our current uses there. The one I think I will say about the orange option is if we do plan to locate them there, that does severely impact the access to it for events like rodeos and what we're having this weekend is motocross. Because obviously it'd impact the area where those people stage in the event, parking and things like that. So it does have some impacts to that as well. The other option, an alternative we had was looking at the community center or old city hall and making some modifications there to house the administrative functions for HPD. And we will say that alternatives, the improvements at Butterfield Park for HPD and these improvements would be needed together. We can't just do one or the other to be able to meet their needs. So this would be a lot of their administrative functions, and then obviously their special operations would be and storage would be out of Butterfield Park. So looking at it, we went into some fairly detailed cost estimating on this one. We got a lot of proposals from contractors. Cody and our facilities team spent a lot of time walking through the building to look at ways they could modify the building. And that turns out to where the total cost of retrofitting this building would be roughly $3 million. We have interior finishes and changes would be about 1.4, exterior would be about $1 million. And then the design and construction management for the project would be roughly $800,000. This is some great artwork that Cody and our facilities team did, of taking the existing layout of the building and identifying those uses. I think they may be able to replace our architect with their.
I don't know about that. Brian's drawings look much better. This is all pen and whiteout.
Yeah. So I don't know, Cody, if you want to go into detail on this.
Yeah. And the reality is, for us, this is looking at future growth, right? I'm sure you've been through our facilities downstairs, and obviously we took over the council space and some other areas in this building. We don't have any growth potential left in this building. So as we look at professional office space, as we continue to grow as a city and look at things like adding additional detectives, we have a critical need for evidence processing and storage, and to really centralize our operation. This allows us for, depending on what y'all decide to build or to approve, this allows us for about 5 to 8 years of growth potential within the HPD. So it really is a short-term Band-Aid, but it does accomplish most of our critical needs. But like Justin said before, we would be looking at these alternatives as a package deal for us on the public safety side. This being the professional office space, more the front door of the PD, so to speak, and the primary operations, and then the facility at Butterfield Park to house equipment and evidence, long-term evidence storage and those types of functions.
Is there anything that, current uses here that would delay us being able to begin? How long would it take before?
We've got an agreement right now with Salt Lake Community College that's using that building.
Right.
In that agreement, I believe it's a year notice.
So it'd be at least a year before we could start on this, okay?
I think one of the major challenges with this site is parking.
Always.
Not sure how viable it is just from the parking standpoint.
That's a lot of offices.
Haven't shared parking with the church.
With the church.
And it's, it's not just the number of parking spaces, it's also the need for secure parking. And some outside storage for things that we can't bring in the building, like munitions and gasoline motors and that type of stuff, so. So there is a significant impact to the shared parking agreement that we have with the LDS church there that would have to be overcome, and that is a pretty big hurdle. And impact to the park as well, as we reduce the availability for use of Main Street Park.
So we looked at some, we thought of some pros and cons for these alternatives. And we thought long and hard to actually try and come up with the best list we can, and we've listed them here. Obviously, it seems like the cons are longer than the pros, but there are some pros, obviously. You know, it does allow, we own the property, we own the facilities. Obviously, they're a lower cost, than the other options that we have on the table. But obviously, there are some cons. We have, utility issues at Butterfield Park. We do have some constraints on where we can locate the buildings, based on the floodplain, and just that continuity of departments, and it is a short-term solution. Both of these alternatives are a short-term solution. Then one of the major ones for the community center is the ability to be able to repurpose that building once HPD has grown out or moved on to another facility. The amount of work and money and the way that's configured, it'd be difficult to try and repurpose that building based on the configuration of what it would be if they moved in there. And as Nathan already touched on, the parking and the access for the church there. So,
Assuming that, let's say that we chose these alternative options, right? Package deal, did them both. How would that impact the public works, or the new public works building? Would there still be as much need in that building? Would it impact the scope and costs of that if this were established as if the idea is we're gonna spend $3 million so the police can only use it for 4 years or 5 years, and then we still have to build a $30 million building, we're instead building a $35 million building, right? It's,
on the public works side, I can say that the facilities that would be potentially built at Butterfield Park obviously would be used, and that would potentially have some impact on what the other facility would, because we'd have storage or parking available there. It would be obviously away from the other facility, but those buildings could be repurposed in some fashion and potentially minimize the size of the other public facility. But
we're gonna be continually growing as a community, and I don't know that the proposal for the public works facility would be the end all of all the needs of our public works and, police down the future. I think it's clear that they would need, like I said, another precinct station or substation or something like that. The question would be, could, retrofitting this serve as additional expansion opportunity down the road as a precinct or something like that? I don't know about location and feasibility and all that kind of stuff. That's a different question, but I guess I'm just asking, are we just adding $9.5 million and 6 years onto our public works
Yeah,
building?
it's a $9 million Band-Aid.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering, are we ended up just increasing our cost $9 million and still not really solving the problem?
I believe so.
So,
Two questions really quick. One, I know we just talked about the terms of the lease agreement with Salt Lake Community College. Remind me of the cost arrangement on that building currently,
They receive no cost.
but they are taking over all the O&M that goes with it.
They took over all the less. So the configuration of it is very similar to a lease and landlord type deal. So if it's something structural, the roof, the concrete on the outside, the parking lot, we maintain those, the elevator. If it's electrical costs, heating, minor repairs, little things like that that they take.
Okay, so that was my first question. Second question is we've talked about things up at Butterfield Park over many years. There's always been this reference to certain language that's included with, I guess, the agreement that went along with Butterfield Park from the family. So how do we feel like that potentially proceeding in that manner has some implications in how that whatever the agreement was from the time that was deeded from the Butterfield family and the uses and intended uses, have we looked at that? And do we have concerns there?
So, myself and Jackie and others in the city have looked very hard for that contract and agreement, and we cannot find it. But our knowledge of it and what we understand is similar to what you said, it was, the property was donated and gifted for a purpose as a park. And the public work facility that is currently there was to serve for a short-term fix until we could find something else and build another facility. And obviously, we've just continued to use that and expand it as we've needed there. But that is something that it would be a concern that it's going against what the purpose or intent of that property donation was.
At some point, we probably really need to nail down what that language is, if there is the ability to, because again, it's been referenced time and time again over the years as we've looked at certain expansions or how to do things over there, but there's always been, public work was only supposed to be a temporary use there, and again, we always talk about it, but I don't know that we have really clarity on what that really means.
And like I said, we've looked and looked, we'll continue to look, and we still bring it up often, and so we haven't been able to find that.
So there's really some feasibility questions about these alternatives, parking, whether or not we could actually do it at Butterfield Park, so there's definitely some hurdles to overcome there. I would ask, there's another question I don't fully have an answer to yet, and that would be, if this was actually done, how would that impact the cost and plans for this building? If it would.
Yeah.
I mean, if we spend $10 million and it takes $8 million out of the cost of that building, okay, maybe there's reason to contemplate it, right? But if it doesn't really change the costs over there, I don't know what the point is.
I don't know.
Wouldn't the plan be, I guess, good question, Steve, because I guess my understanding is that if we built the new facility, the intent would be to move everything over there and really not utilize the space up at Butterfield Park as we are today. Is that correct or incorrect?
So that was the main intent, is to move the majority of the functions. We did still allow for storage of materials, and obviously phase one doesn't build everything we need, right? There were other additions in phase two. And so we would still house a lot of our salt storage in our, what we call the sludge pit, like we talked about last time, for our stormwater department, would still be housed there. And there would still be storage and parking of like the float and some of the Arts Council stuff, and some of those things would still be housed there. And the Butterfield Park still has needs, and so part of the Parks Department would function out of there to maintain Butterfield Park and some of the parks in that area. So not all functions were planned to move. We still plan to utilize that space as well.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not advocating that we divide our police into two different buildings and keep it that, I don't know that that's a really great solution either. But I think there's a responsibility to ask that, does spending this money impact future money we would spend or have to spend? Because offsets would be important to understand. If there's no offsets, that's really important to understand too, right? I mean, that helps make the question a lot
It
easier.
seems that there would be, just based on this conversation, it seems to me like it would be minimal offsets.
You're still building a pretty big building.
Yeah.
It's just how much of it you finish at what time. Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Quantifying it, we haven't done that, but obviously, just looking at it, it would offset, space, which equates to money.
Sure, but I guess even, back in the napkin, how much it costs to finish a square foot of in commercial space, I don't know, what is it these days?
But we're somewhere in
$150, $200, I mean,
we're
I
somewhere
don't
in
know,
the
right?
range of, on this building,
Like I say, fire stations right now.
Or $400 or something, yeah.
the range on the public works facility was $225 to $310 or so. So it'd be in the, depending on what
Yeah,
finish
it's
this
just $300 a square foot, so if you just didn't finish, 50,000 square feet, you save $1.5 million. That's not
Right.
the same as $10 million, so.
And it is scalable, obviously, right? So if we look at an alternative option of the community center from the PD side, that would capture a lot of office space needs for us that could be removed from the plan of public works facility. Some of that might return to shelled space or the more operational functions like it was originally programmed before we combined the two programs. So there certainly is the ability to capture some of that, whether that translates into the full price tag or not. We don't know at this point. There's probably a bit to recapture, but.
And we don't have to answer it all, just ask the questions.
So if I might, I think there's a couple challenges with the whole program we're looking at. By phasing, we don't deal with animal services, right, cause they're in phase 2 or phase 3. And so we know that's a need, and there's no doubt that there is a need. I am questioning a little bit, based on my experience of building public buildings and in the community growing this fast, whether a 50-year time horizon is realistic. If that's too long, trying to take too big a bite and make a guess. One of the fear, no offense to the police, I think if you put them together, eventually you're looking to build a new public works facility because the police will expand and take over the entire facility. That's just what happens.
Bullies, I tell you, bullies.
Nobody seems to tell us no.
So there's a lot of,
That's a mean.
kind of that concern, is this, is this an old, if 50 years is the long term, maybe that's just too long a planning horizon.
Yeah.
And I think stepping back a little bit, Alan and I have had a few conversations about how do we fund it right now.
Yeah.
We can't quite get there, and so we need some time to step back. I don't think the city hall really, the old city hall really buys you much.
Right, that's what I'm concerned about too.
Except a place to throw some money.
Yeah, you can dump some more money into it. The Butterfield, the existing facilities have some value, and I think, if typically in a real estate transaction, if you wanna encumber the property, you record it on the title. So if we haven't done a title search, we should do title search and see what was recorded to encumber that property. If not, then it was more likely a handshake deal.
Handshake.
I would advocate, you might wanna think about leaving your parks crews there, right? You have a facility that functions, maybe you, again, if you start to shorten the time horizon of what this new building is supposed to cover. I think 50 years, growing as fast as we are, none of us, I don't know how long this building was supposed to cover us for, but, how long?
50.
Yeah, I think it's just too long a horizon. I think you say, okay, realistically, we're gonna spend
Yeah,
this,
not
it's gonna
even.
cover this long. And then you, as the community grows, you have to look at that again. So I think we have some ideas on what to do. I don't think we're gonna solve it tonight, but we wanted to see what we've been looking at.
Can I throw out a crazy thought? And I'm hoping that Monty doesn't jump across the table and choke me out here.
I'm just gonna slide over a little bit.
Is there a way that we could expand what we have at Butterfield Park for storage and equipment and servicing of Public Works equipment? And then house Public Works administration in the community college building, the old city hall building? And then not have to build a Public Works building, we still need to build a public safety building. Does that make
It's
sense?
an option, yeah. Well,
I
and
mean, they're gonna need a lot of space, we know that, and they have needs too. Public Works needs things. What we're saying is that the community college doesn't necessarily function for the police. Could it function as an administrative function for Public Works? I don't wanna kill anybody's dreams here, Ed, I just need to ask this question about, how do we stretch our dollars as far as they can go and still provide quality services and, reasonable accommodations so you can actually service and maintain and store all the equipment that we have?
If I can, I want to add my voice to Steve there and kind of Nathan's. When we talk about alternatives, that's kind of what I had in mind, is not building other buildings, but What if we don't build anything for a few years so that we can build the right buildings in the right location, the right time? How do we get by doing things like Steve just mentioned?
You're still gonna have some construction costs and some retrofitting costs, but you would eliminate things like, we've done a lot of upfit on like ballistic glass, evidence and firearm storage, and all those costs have been planned in, so you could potentially reduce that, cost significantly. The parking issue would be probably mostly resolved. There's still some other, pieces to that, but, and to your point about decentralization, for us, and from the public safety side, you know as well, Clint, that not being in one place is a good thing, right? As we start looking about the growth of the city and our geography, there will be a need for our public safety to decentralize at some point in the future anyway, so it helps with our operations, so that's certainly something we should look at.
I guess I would just encourage some outside the box thinking about, could that serve as a small substation and public works administration? Could it have another function, right? I'm just trying to figure out how we can make whatever the limited amount of money we have actually work. If it doesn't work, that's an acceptable answer too, right? Like, that's just not a feasible thing, here's the reasons why, I can accept that. But I don't know that we've kind of sifted through that.
The combination is hard, right?
Yeah.
So if you put public safety or PD functions in that facility, there are certain restrictions relative to BCI and UCGIS compliance, like I was talking about before, the upfit. So some of that stuff would have to be done.
None
but
of
if
the
you
questions
were
I'm
to-
asking are easy, I
Yeah.
understand, right?
But the whole facility would have to be compliant in order for us to put any PD operations in that building. So there are certainly some considerations there.
Okay.
Did you have more,
Yeah,
Justin?
Architects love to
I
draw
just-
new stuff all over
I just had a
again,
couple
right?
more
Just
slides and it's mostly
completely
related to
rack
cost.
everything and start over.
So this is just bringing, just updating some of the potential bond information. And then also on the alternatives, if we did go that route, that's something like what a debt service payment would be like for that. Because obviously we don't have the cash to build or fund the alternatives either, so essentially that's kind of where we're at.
No.
And then-
We've got some homework to come back to you with, but we just wanted to bring you up to speed where we're at today.
And that just kind of breaks down what those potential debt service payments would be by fund, so. Anyway,
And Steve, if you really wanted money to come across the table, just ask him if there's a way to repurpose Station 103.
You can just turn that into public works, right?
Police station.
Just for for the sake of the question, Steve, looking real quick through our cost estimates at the community center, if you remove the PD functions from all of that, it's about $300,000 savings. There's obviously some needs there relative to landscaping and curbing and the roof and HVAC and some other stuff that would have to happen anyway, but the PD specific is about $300,000.
Yeah, and I guess that whether we're spending $3 million to make it a public works facility or we're spending $3 million to make it a police facility, right? If that actually can function that way, and then it would impact the need that we have for the public works facility, could it change the size and scope and vision of that and other uses for that property and things like that, right? So there's a whole cascade of events that can transpire from whatever answers we come up with, so.
Except we're on our own now, because our contract with our architect was up in June, so as we move forward and look at that stuff, we'll have to figure that in-house, but we can certainly look at a lot of outside the box stuff.
Somebody had
Well, I
some
mean,
good
we'll have to go
architect
back to
skills up
whiteout
there, I'm
and
telling
pen,
you.
because I won't have the fancy architect, so.
Oh, whiteout and pens, I think we're all right here.
All right, thank you guys, appreciate that update.
Yeah.
We'll move on to item 2.2, which is the deer hunting and mitigation program regulations update. Justin, you're up again.
back again. So I don't have a presentation this time, so we'll try and make it a little bit quick. So there's two items here that I wanted to cover. One was in regards to the hunting within city limits, and the hunting seasons are coming up on us again shortly. And then also kind of an update on our deer mitigation program. So I'll cover the hunting within city limits first. So kind of a recommendation is we've obviously operated with hunting within city limits for a couple of years now. The first year, obviously, I think we can all admit that it was a little bit rough. Somewhat of a DWR putting in this extra hunt that we were unaware of until kind of last minute. Kind of put some stress on us and our residents. But with some of the things we implemented last year, a lot of the complaints and concerns we had were greatly diminished and reduced. We received far less calls last year. And so with the hunting coming up again, it begins August 21st and runs through November 30th of this year. That includes the regular season archery hunt and then the extended archery hunt. Our recommendation is essentially to kind of operate as we did last year. And some of those things that we did were, we placed signs that showed maps, give information about our ordinances, some rules, about, hunting on city limits and city property. We placed all those signs at all the trail access points. Our city website was updated with all of that same information, contact information, for DWR so that people could report complaints. And then there was also an increased HPD presence, trail patrol in the area. And then also we had a lot of communication and extra enforcement by DWR out here handling some of those issues. And I think that mitigated a lot of those issues. So essentially we just are given a report saying our intent is just to continue to operate as we did last year. And the most of the calls I got last year were related to people that actually wanted to come hunt and actually understand the program and where they can hunt, the limits of where they can and can't. And so I think that was good. Jackie and our customer service staff set up a smart sheet to track all of the complaints and issues we had, and there was essentially zero. It was just mostly answering questions and things. So it was actually, I think it worked very well. So are there any questions on that before I jump to the next? Okay, so going
Jared,
on.
any questions for you?
No.
Okay.
Okay, on to the Urban Deer Mitigation Program. This has been a program that's been in place since 2015. It was initially put in place to, essentially it was a safety and protection of property. We had a lot of auto deer collision accidents on our roads. In 2014, I think the highest we got up to was 160 or 170 in a year just on Harriman roads. And then also we had a lot of complaints.
Say that again, so I made sure I heard that.
165 or so.
160 something incident car
Those were
deer
reported.
incidents?
Those were reported.
Holy.
Yeah, it was.
And so we started looking for solutions to that, and then also a lot of, I don't wanna say complaints, but concerns from residents, deer in their yards and, property damage, and then also safety concerns of having deer in their yards with kids and things, so. We implemented this, it's been highly successful. We've had a great relationship with the DWR. We also have a great relationship with, we contract out, our lethal removal, with the company, and they've been great. We lovingly refer to them as deer ninjas. You never see them, don't know they're out there, but there have been over the years some changes in the program, with the DWR. So originally we could go out and we could lethally remove with archery equipment, and we could also trap and relocate those animals. And we were highly successful in those first couple years. In the last year, they implemented to where we could no longer relocate the animals once they are trapped, because the Division of Wildlife Resources was concerned about transferring of disease and those types of things from our deer to others. So we can still trap, it's just we can no longer relocate. They have to be euthanized. And then also this year, they're restricting the dates in which we can remove deer. So it used to be we could remove them from August 1st through December 31st, lethally, and then we could trap year round. But now they're limiting us to August 1st to October 31st. So they've limited our time frame when we can remove those animals. And our most successful time is actually between mid-October through the end of December. Because at that time, deer are looking for places to eat.
Snow's pushing them
Snow.
down, so, yeah.
So vegetation and things is more difficult to get to, they're hungrier, so they'll go into a trap. And so with those modifications, I thought that it'd be better for us to take a step back and work with the DWR, cause in my conversations with them, they're continually changing this program and making modifications, and it sounds like there'll be some fairly large changes coming up this fall through the winter, to the program. And the program does cost us to have our contractor go out and remove those. And it's fairly minimal. It's cost us, around $7,000 a year over the last year or two. I think I put that information there potentially, yeah. But I think we'll get a low return because I don't think we'll remove as many deer. And so, as you can see,
So our contract isn't based on per deer.
so it's based on per site that they hunt out of, because they have to set up cameras and bait and spend time at that. And so it's based on a site plus a minimal cost for each deer as well. And so the base cost, I think, is what we're not going to make up. We're not gonna get a good benefit for our money. And so I'd say my suggestion would be to put this on hold, at least for a year, so that we can work with the DWR to come up with a good program in the future. So that's I will give real quickly just some information on the auto deer collision. So like I said, we were in that 160, 170 range in 2014. In 2015, we went down to 122, and last year we had 21. So we've made some great impacts there.
So it's working.
It's definitely working.
So my concern is if we don't do it, are we gonna see that number jump back up to 100?
So, the deer that we removed also has greatly reduced. We're essentially in the last 4 years, we've just been managing. The first couple of years, we removed quite a few deer. I think through 2018, we removed 276 in those 3 years. And last year, we removed around 27. And then, in 2019, 27, and in 2020, we only removed 12. So I think that if we forego a year, I don't think we're gonna see a drastic increase in this. I think it's just,
And with the drought and the limited vegetation, they're probably not gonna be a boom.
plus we have an increased hunting presence, which I think is impacting that as well.
So you think it would be, not have a big impact to public safety if we forego this for a year?
I don't think so.
Justin, the question I have is, does taking that pause put in jeopardy any of the things that we have had to do up to this point to
No,
put
so
this
one-
program into place? Cause
one
I
of
don't
the-
wanna have to have us start over either.
So one of the reasons that we talked about this is the final year of a 3-year, so that we have a core, which is a certificate of registration we have to file with the Division of Wildlife Resources. And that expired. And then when I was having my discussions with them about renewing, that's when they started talking to me about this new program. So rather than go forward and update that core and take the work to do that, I thought I'd come back and see if that's something that you'd wanna do, forego for a little bit, and then we'll just readdress it and update our core with them once we have a better understanding of what some of these modifications may be.
Kinda seems like the right
I
decision.
think that's appropriate.
Okay.
Again, I have concerns of seeing a substantial increase, but hearing all of those other statistics and again, an increased hunting presence, I think that even though we potentially could see a small uptick, I don't think it would be a significant uptick.
I don't think so either.
Jared, any thoughts?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Alright. Anything else on that, Justin?
That's it. Thank you.
Alright, thank you. We'll move on to item 2.3, which is the discussion of the drafted general plan update. Mr. Spencer.
So as you probably heard, planning commission might make a motion on the draft general plan to approve it as it is. And the consideration now is whether or not to move this on to city council agenda meeting or if there is additional changes that you'd like to see take place before that meeting, that public hearing takes place. And Susie Pethram, I think, is on the call to answer any questions, and maybe she's got a short presentation that she would like to make as well, that would help clarify the
Okay.
issues.
So,
Are you on, Susie?
I'm on.
Okay. Steve, did you have any questions
No.
before we maybe had Susie move through her brief presentation? Then see if that answers anything for you.
my comment won't necessarily impact whether or not I think we need to get all the information from Susie and everything else, but I'm really concerned in my reading of this, understanding that a general plan amendment is a legislative matter. It has to be handled by legislative action. And up to this point, the legislative body has been very minimally involved in this process. We've had some updates and some briefings and stuff, but my understanding is the planning commission's been reviewing this and aspects of this for months and months and months and months. Planning team and with consultants have been working on this for 2 years. And now we're expecting the legislative body that has to make the decision on this to do it in 2 weeks. Just doesn't seem in the realm of reasonability.
And I think that's really the question is when does the council wanna see this potentially on an agenda? Certainly, we can continue to discuss it in a work
Yeah.
meeting for a few.
Totally need to get all the information and update and go through it, but
And this has been an ongoing process for quite some time, as I understand it. There's been a lot of a lot of open house meetings, public meetings, the information has been dispersed. But yeah, if you're not comfortable with where the plan is now, you're welcome to continue to discuss it and
There's just-
get it to a place where you.
there's a lot of things on the table right now, a lot of things we've been reading through, and, I was trying to go through this, over the last couple days, and there's a lot in here, right? Not only just, maps and zoning, but the reasoning behind it and the thinking through it and what all these things mean for our community and are they right and that kind of stuff. Not in any way, shape or form questioning the quality work that's been done and, all the time that's been put into it. But there's one thing that I realized is that if I've got to vote on something, I wanna really understand it. And I don't wanna just rubber stamp something that's this substantial and this significant. And so, at least for me, I'm not comfortable moving it onto an agenda for the 25th at this point.
Sure.
That doesn't mean we don't need to have a lot of conversations about this, but just for that, that's where I'm at this point, so.
Well, let's have Susie go through her presentation and then we can go back to discussion and see again what direction we wanna give staff in order to help us through that process. So go ahead, Susie.
Great, thank you. So this is a presentation that we gave at the Planning Commission public hearing that we held in July. So I'll just kind of quickly go through that presentation, not going into the same amount of detail, but just to let you know what was presented at the public hearing. And then we finished with the discussion items that came up in that public hearing that the Planning Commission wanted to pass on as far as her recommendations along with some of the staff recommendations. So, moving on. So this is just a quick overview of the process, and I think as Clint mentioned, there's been a good deal of engagement, and then we've been in this refinement process for a while, and getting back to that extensive engagement that we did earlier this spring with a lot of support from John and his group in communications. We had the different outreach events in person and online, and then incorporated those comments into the draft that we presented to the Planning Commission back in June, and then for the public hearing last month. So the outreach recap, we updated that just to show the additional input and events from the spring, and updated those numbers as reflected in the plan document compared to the draft that was presented to you back in December. And just to recap the values, the 5 key values that were articulated form the foundation of the plan, along with the 6 priorities. These are things that are infused into the foundation of the plan's recommendations, the goals, the policies. The plan structure, the vision and key initiatives, followed by the policy guide and the action plan, supported by that future land use and development tool. So I'm just to breeze through these, but just one of the key things that we wanted to make sure we captured in the plan with the vision is that it's really a combination of eyes on the future with the town center as the cultural and social hub of the city, with respect for the past and promoting the history of the community and its agricultural and rural roots. So trying to go for a balance of those two as reflected in the 4 key initiatives. And just gonna breeze through these. I can circle back if you want me to, but I just want to get to the focus on the information that came from the Planning Commission. The policy guide is structured into 6 different sections based on the priorities, economic development opportunities, community character, community amenities, safe transportation choices, employment opportunities, and a mix of housing. The action plan structured into essentially 3 different types of action items: standards and requirements, programs and investments, and process and planning action items. The future land use and development map, we've got 3 different categories: the residential and neighborhood, and mixed use and commercial, and our civic and community categories. This is the current draft of the future land use map as presented at that public hearing in July. And the 3 primary topics and areas of discussion down on the southeast corner of Harriman, right along the west side of Mountain View Corridor, the area where the Jordan School District has purchased some property. There is discussion about changing the use of the property for the school to a civic use. There have been some requests to change some of the designations from what's shown currently, a combination of employment and mixed use, into a residential category. The Planning Commission recommended making that change for the school district property, but leaving the other areas as is for now. The second area is up just north of the town center, and looking to, there was a request for discussion about changing some of the neighborhood commercial to residential uses. The Planning Commission felt like they recommended retaining the neighborhood commercial designation for both sites for now. The third was providing some more direction for the planned community areas. In our earlier drafts, we had shown this area, the potential future annexation of Olympia and the Kennecott land, reflecting the categories that are in city boundaries and reflected in the future land use map. We received some direction to show it in more of a general planned community designation, and the Planning Commission felt like they wanted to see more direction for this area reflected in the general plan, so that they had some basis for their discussions, that the community had a little bit more information about what the city and the Planning Commission envisioned, and that moving forward, the property owners had more of an understanding of what the city was looking at. So that was discussion, and what we looked at was establishing a balance between specific assigned categories that were shown in the previous draft and the one general category, and looking at the combination, just showing potential desired mix of uses and the percentages and needs based on what the Planning Commission and community felt was a good fit for those areas. And then specific locations would be able to then shift as details emerge for development in the area. Essentially trying to leverage the knowledge that we have about the long range transportation plan, investments that are either funded or potentially going to be funded in the future, and then looking to establish those desired connections with uses and development details with the current boundaries of Pyramid now. So using a combination of descriptive text and conceptual diagrams was the direction the Planning Commission gave us. This is what we have come up as a potential solution for including in the draft, looking at more of a bubble diagram for general locations for the categories that are used in the future land use and development chapter, and then reflecting that in that desired percentage breakdown of the uses for this general annexation area. So that summarizes the main comments and directions and recommendations of the Planning Commission on the draft as is. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you all for discussion. Thanks for your comments, Steve. And Clint, I don't know if you have anything to add. Open it up for discussion and comments.
All right, thank you, Susie. Any specific questions for Susie right now, Steve or Jared?
It's really good. I mean, there's so much great stuff in here. A ton of work has been done. There's a lot of great information combined in there. But just like the Planning Commission's recommendations, I would agree that we need some more specificity out there. The general plan is really our trump card for anything, right? And I think that's preserving the vision out there, and I think that can, we can be considerate of the landowners out there and some of their plans too, right, that are already underway. I don't think that those necessarily need to be in conflict with each other.
Right.
But if that's the way we're going, I think that needs to be incorporated into this general plan, right? I don't think a big purple blob is sufficient, so I would agree with that recommendation.
Okay. Jared, any comments from you right now, or I guess direction on what you need to have or feel like should happen and for us to keep this process moving?
For me, and I know Sherry's kind of in the same camp, I'd agree with Steve's original comments that we appreciate all the work that's been done, but the same comment that I've made the last couple of times we've seen the presentation is, all right, well, we have to make a decision. When do we get to be involved in the process? I'd have to agree that if it shows up on an agenda for us to consider voting on, there's no way I'm ready to approve it in its current form.
Okay, so I guess the question then would be, does the council feel that they need time to try and just digest it on their own, or is there specific areas or items of the proposed general plan that they would like to have staff be prepared to come back to our next meeting and the work meeting and work through or present on to help with that deeper understanding and consumption of what's in front of us right now for consideration?
I don't know it's a matter of consuming what's in front of us. It's a matter of us going through our own process of evaluation and, changing things that we feel need to be, et cetera. Like, we just haven't gone through a process with the council. We haven't been involved.
Yeah, I'm just full of all kinds of unpopular ideas tonight, so I just know I'm gonna say this, and I can't even believe I'm saying this, so. I thought there's a lot of benefit to having a single purpose work meeting. The other night when we went through that, I know, the other night when we were just focused on one thing.
Written that down right here.
Yeah.
I think we accomplished a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're talking about another one for single purpose, and I think we're gonna accomplish a lot in that too. I think it would be, meaningful for us as a council to sit down and discuss this together, right? To go through and go, I have questions about this, and what could we change this, and that gives us all a chance to bounce ideas off of each other and kind of collaborate a group discussion around what we're seeing so far and maybe some suggestions we'd make. And then I think once we've done that, then we could have, updates in our general meetings and say, okay, what did you get back to us on the, 19 things we listed or whatever it is, so.
No, to your point, Steve, I think I definitely have the same thought as well. Again, as much as we don't wanna add other meetings, but this is a big topic. And it's one to try and fit in the rest of our agendas to really be able to have that real dialogue on would be very difficult to do.
There's a lot of big topics on our plate right now.
Yep.
And I think trying to squeeze this in as a piece of these, generalized work meetings is just not gonna be productive. Or we're gonna spend 3 hours on that and then have to go till 2 in the morning, so.
Jared, you're always a huge fan of additional meetings. Give us your input.
Well, that's part of the issue why I'm not there right now is this is one of 3 or 4 city meetings for me this week. But I agree with Steve. Something like this has to be on its own. We have to give it the attention that it needs. It can't just be thrown on as an item and expect us to get through it in 30 or 45 minutes.
So, I guess I'll suggest then that maybe we have just staff work on sending out a doodle poll and figure out as we forecast ahead and know that we have other issues that we're dealing with, try and find a time to schedule out a work meeting specific to this item.
The week after Thanksgiving is pretty open for me right now.
Well, I'm curious with the three of you who are here, in other communities, when we have this, we often started, for especially issues like this, we would meet on the off Wednesday. I know you have planning commission meeting at that time. So
It's actually on Thursday.
They're on Thursday, so maybe that off Wednesday.
And we've had this discussion before too, of
Just scheduling
utilizing
an off week, yeah.
the off Wednesdays again to use just as work meetings to deal with some of these bigger issues and keep us, so we can try and again lighten, everyone's talked about 100 times how, once we hit 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, it's, we're all pretty done at that
Climbing up the
point.
wall, yeah.
We're all pretty done at that point, and I think, again, we all have other responsibilities and families and everything outside of here, but we also have a commitment to meet that. So, Jared, what's your feeling on looking at potentially scheduling our off Wednesdays for additional work meetings, maybe, for the next few weeks or so as we tackle some of these bigger issues that we're dealing with?
For me, my schedule is always 3 to 4 weeks ahead. So if you get out ahead of that, then I'm more flexible. But in that window, it's really hard to move things around.
Okay? Well, can we have?
We'll do a doodle poll,
Yeah,
but
have
maybe we'll
staff work.
focus on some of those times and we'll see if we can't get something specific, a special meeting specific to talk about
The
the
general
general plan. What I heard you say is the first one, you really wanna kinda start going through and bounce ideas, and then you'll generate a list for us to work on.
Yeah, I think that was really productive, the way that we did it the other night, right? We're all gonna have a chance to go through it and make some notes and talk about specific things, but I think going through sections, okay, this is what this is meaning, this kind of where we're heading, this direction. It gives us an opportunity to give group input, like to debate and banter some things back and forth that I think will give, an initial list of tasks to say, okay, here's some things that this council would love to see, let's work on that. And then it gives us a chance to consider those issues over a little bit of time and see what the update is and really kind of come to a final version here, so.
And really, the process, as you mentioned, it is a legislative process, and this is the time for you to be looking at the document. And we fully appreciate the fact that you wanna understand it and understand how it, applies to the city, and, cause, in the long run, that is the backbone of the development in the future, so. We're fully supportive of that, and we can help with any kind of understanding that's necessary. I would just ask as you approach this, it's just a reminder that there's been a lot of public input, a lot of, this has gone back to 2019. So a lot of public input, and a lot of meetings and open houses that it's been provided. And so the public has kind of put their input into it already. So just keep that in mind as you move through the process.
Absolutely.
I think that's a very fair reminder, yeah.
For sure. Okay, anyone else have any other comments on item 2.3? Alright, seeing none, we'll look to schedule another time to dive into that singularly all by itself.
Let's go, we can get this done before.
Alright, we'll move on to item 2.4 then, discussion of draft amendment to modify the flag lot regulations in city code. Mr. Spencer, you're up again.
Alright, let's do that. So this is something that, this is an ordinance that seems to be in flux, from year to year. This has come up again where we've had some interest for flag lots and haven't been able to accommodate. And there's been some interest in accommodating these flag lots again. So we've been working as a staff and the planning commission to come up with an ordinance that may address some of the issues that are out there and looking for ways to implement flag lots in certain areas. So just by way of definition, this lot here that's outlined on the screen is the definition of a flag lot, where you've got a stem and then a larger part of the lot. Typically, these are always behind another lot that fronts onto the street with more frontage. They have a small the access is through that flag portion. So the current ordinances, again, adopted in 2017, not too long ago, intended to increase the restrictions, reduce the flag lot development, and add new standards as part of that. So these are some of the reasons for and against flag lots. It improves, property taxes. It increases population, which increases revenue. It adds to private property values through development potential, and then discourages demolition. There may be others as well. Some of the reasons against it is that it doesn't provide for traditional subdivision development. It might change the historic or agricultural use of private property. These are other ones that you can take a look at. One of the other ones that's maybe not up on the board, but sometimes it does, as you put a lot behind a lot, it changes the nature of a subdivision, or it might increase the amount of privacy in other lots that have developed around it, with an understanding that it bought a certain type of lot. So this was an issue that came before us not too long ago. There was a subdivision that proposed these two flag lots. Current ordinance doesn't allow a flag lot in a subdivision with more than two lots in it, so this configuration was not able to be approved. The planning commission did look at a different configuration without the flag lots and approved the subdivision that way. Another thing that is problematic with the ordinance right now is that it requires a solid screening fence down this access, which can create some safety concerns as you approach the street. Another one is it prevents infill. So on this map here, the light blue lines are the minor collector streets. There seems to be a magnet or a lot of interest on 7300 West right now for flag lots. And currently, the ordinance does not allow flag lots on a minor collector.
My favorite.
Another one, this is another property that has been interested in developing a flag lot, but flag lots are not allowed access through an easement on adjacent property. So in this configuration, if they developed 4 lots, you'd have 4 accesses coming out onto the public street there, as opposed to revising the ordinance to allow for multiple accesses into a flag lot development. So in our amendment, we clarified some language in the city code. We've worked with engineering to work on some of the concerns on allowing access out onto a minor collector street, how that's done safely and in a way that would be beneficial to the community. Allowing more than one flag lot in a subdivision, and then in that fencing example, just how do we address that? This is one of the amendments, looking at just changing the definition so it can occur in an agricultural. Currently, it's not part of the definition, but that's where we're seeing a lot of these flag lots take place. I'm trying to move through this fast. Going too fast, I think. So these are some of the standards that we looked at with engineering to make sure that the accesses can be done safely. Locating the access 50 feet away from intersections, addressing the type of pavement that's required, widening the staff portion from 20 feet to 25 feet, and then limiting how long that staff can be. I think just some other clarification here. And then not allowing, of course, a subdivision or a flag lot being created from an illegally divided parcel. Let's see, so this number 8 here, this would provide, this would allow the planning director, so typically the front setback on a lot is going to be the setback that's closest to the public right-of-way. This would allow the planning director to possibly change where that front lot setback occurs. We've seen a couple of examples that this would be beneficial to community members, or residents anyways. One of the other ones maybe I skipped over, but there is a provision in here that would allow the planning commission the ability to change that, the requirement of having a screening wall where it causes a conflict or a safety concern as it approaches the right of way as well.
Site distances.
Yeah, this one here, just didn't get to it yet. It still maintains all, all these other standards that are currently in place. So see, these are just a list of some of the alternatives, keeping the status quo what we're doing now. And then considering different alternatives, if there's other options that the council would like us to pursue or to look at, and come back to the council with those considerations, we can be glad to do so in terms of number of lots that were accessed or.
One question, and I apologize because I read the staff report but didn't go through the ordinance completely. Are those exception rules done just administratively by a designee, or is that done by the planning commission as a body? Those exception, the areas where there's flexible decision making here,
Right.
who
So
gets to make those decisions?
I think going back to, to change
One was the planning director, right?
Right, that's what,
Right,
yep,
the
I saw
planning
that,
director
right.
could change the configuration of where that setback occurs, and then the planning commission could change the
Just the
requirement
fencing.
for the fencing,
Just the fencing.
just the fencing. All others would be, and all others would be just built into the ordinance, those are the two exceptions that have to be reviewed.
I would just say in general, and I've tried to be pretty consistent on this, that when there's ambiguity in our city ordinances, the idea of one person having discretion over what to do or not to do concerns me. I like the idea of a body being able to review and make those decisions.
Okay.
I don't wanna burden our planning commission with a whole lot of, relatively administrative type of things. But, some of these things are not in a vacuum, right? They're in an entire community and how it impacts neighbors and how it impacts other things. And I just think that being able to have some of these things discussed either in a public setting and with a group of people to discuss and make that decision, I feel better about that process than just one person doing it, but
Can you go back to that one that had the planning director listed on it?
yeah.
No, that was for the setbacks here.
I mean, this and again is just dealing with really front yard setbacks, right?
Right.
And how a home may be configured on a flag lot and where that's measured or designated from, right?
Right, so, I mean, currently, if on a corner lot, you're gonna have a side yard facing the corner and then a front yard.
Sure.
Administratively, we've been able to kind of adjust those to accommodate, how a home is situated on a lot.
And
This would
honestly,
just be
I
something
have
similar.
great confidence in our engineering and planning department to be able to come up with a reasonable solution there. But I also, I try to be consistent and suggest that
Any exception come back to a body.
yeah, and maybe there's a way to do it where if it's, something like this, it just gets, it gets signed off, but then it goes to the planning commission for a review if they want to debate it, they can, but at least they would have a public body has a chance to review an exception to
The standard.
the standards, right? That's kind of what their job is. Am I throwing too much under Plato?
On this particular one, I certainly, I don't disagree with your point, Steve. I guess on this particular one, as it relates to some of the setback issues that we have, I think that's the planning department and i.e. the planning director, I think, I don't know, for me, that's where the consistency, I think, does come in to really, the experts of that and how they look at it and apply it. I'm actually okay with this one as it is, but it's certainly something that we can talk about, because again, I think they understand it. They deal with it every day on everything, and so that's, consistency, I think, is key here, and I think that consistency in this particular issue, probably that we get best consistency from the planning department, i.e. the planning director in that process, but.
It's hard for me to say I disagree with
Right.
anything you just said, cause I do.
But-
And I don't disagree this is the right solution, it's hard for me to speak against this. But what I'm trying to speak in favor of at the same time is trying to suggest there's a reason we have a public body, a planning commission, and a format for which these kind of exceptions and changes and layouts and plans are debated and discussed, and I think there's a value in that.
No, I don't, like I say, I don't
I'm not
disagree.
suggesting that maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a compromise way to do this.
What I don't wanna do, honestly, not that the point that you made of maybe having that recommendation go to the planning commission, I don't disagree with that, other than it lengthens out again the
I
time
know,
to do it, and that's what we've always been trying to, instead of lengthen out this process, is find ways to be more efficient in the process.
does the planning commission have a consent agenda? Like, you know what I mean? Could it just be something that they get a chance to just consider?
They pull it if they want.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
right, like they have a chance to move it into the regular agenda for debate or something, but
I think
We're
they-
working on that.
Yeah,
We want that to happen.
cause I think there are some things they could,
we were talking about this the other night about purely administrative things versus, right?
I mean,
Yeah,
you might get some pushback, of course, from the building community, cause if you require another meeting
I know.
to be able to locate something, like that. Now,
no,
I
I
don't
would say
see
from the
you're gonna
builder
get-
community, I can see that, but one flag lot, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that you're gonna have, this is not gonna be an overwhelming number of applications.
Right.
right. So I'm wondering, in addressing this issue, if there's a standard that we could put in place, so, so a front lot typically is 28 or 25 feet, side yard's gonna be around 8 feet, possibly 8 to 10 feet, something like that. So if you switch those around, the concerns would be maybe it's gonna be too close to a house on this side or
Yeah.
a building on this side. If there was some kind of standard that we could implement that would protect that, or this can happen in this kind of situation, is that something that you would entertain, or would you rather just?
I guess I'd just say, we do have city standards on setbacks, right? And I think that we would like them to be following that, but some of these lots are a little weird. And there may be reasons to grant exceptions to those general city standards, and I'm okay with that, if it makes sense. And if it's something that, through a public hearing and a body decides, I'm really okay with that. What I'm less happy about is the idea that that type of an exception is just done strictly administratively by one person. I don't know if there's an appeal process written in there, I'm sure there is, but,
I agree with you on that, Steve.
yeah. And I don't think any of us are excited about having, suddenly a deluge of, flag lot debates coming into all of our meetings, right? But, I don't know.
And really,
I hate being a pain in the ass, but you kinda have to, right? But,
And
by
maybe
nature,
part
I
of
think.
this is, so all subdivisions come before the planning commission for review. When a flag lot comes in for review, maybe that's when we establish, this is gonna be the front lot setback, or front yard setback. And that would be just how it's.
So you do it at the time they
At the
draw
time.
it, so you're not dealing with it when they come in to place the building you've already determined.
Right.
And
I was wondering if that was a possibility too. Again, there might
Go
be
ahead,
some
Jared, and then I'll
exceptions,
put
but
my
yeah, go
thing
ahead,
up,
Jared.
I was just gonna say, those things greatly affect the surrounding property owners, right? So, there needs to be, especially if it's an exception, I'd hate to find out that my neighbor just went down to City Hall and talked to his buddy and got an exception, and I didn't have a chance to tell him my concerns about it, right?
And now their front porch is 8 feet from my fence,
Right.
So yeah, I think we can address that just at the subdivision level. So if you went to the planning commission, if you wanted this to go to the planning commission for approval, I think we could probably accommodate that.
One other question I have about this too is, you use the example of those two lots in that subdivision with the, the lawn flag access. Under the previous ordinance, that was prohibited. Under these revisions, would that still be prohibited?
No. that would be permitted as long as they met the lot standards.
Okay, permitted. Okay. I guess you can't have it both ways, right? We want a great ordinance and then I also want a public process. Sometimes those two things conflict with each other, so.
Yep.
I think as long as it's permitted, but exceptions to standards still would have to be reviewed by the planning commission, I'm okay with that. But if it otherwise met all the standards and it was just, the only reason it got denied is because there's a long access, as long as that's compliant with the rest of the ordinance, that should be an administrative process, right? But if they're having weird setback changes and all that kind of stuff and not layouts,
Then eyes on it.
then it should be have eyes on it, yeah.
I agree. Back to, I think there was one question in there that talked about maybe how many lots could be accessed off of a single one.
Right.
I mean, I think that's a valid question and something that to be looked at, but for me, I wouldn't wanna I'd have to have a really compelling argument to have more than two for me.
But that Oakley one, 4 made really good sense to me. To have all 4 of those lots with one, right, it made sense there. But if you allowed one access with an easement, then you wouldn't necessarily have to have flag lots, right?
Yeah.
But then it's the debate of whether or not you allow a public road to have 4 lots like that, or does it need to meet city standards, a big cul-de-sac and screw everything up, and that was the whole debate last time, right? So,
Absolutely. Again, I think that there's always gonna be some place that someone can argue that there should be an exception. Generally
and
speaking.
there's a process for
Yeah,
that. There's
and
a-
generally
right.
speaking, for me, like I say, I too is having sat through many flag lot discussions over the years. Again, it's, I mean, I'm probably gonna have to go see my therapist again, cause, you know, a lot of
Flag
therapy helped me get past those issues, but here we are again. Jared, anything else on this item?
Nope.
Okay,
So this time, you want to bring this back to another work session before we move forward on to a general consideration, or?
You want us to just tweak that one section? and
Maybe just
bring
tweak
it
that
back?
I would
and bring it
tweak
back
it.
for action, yeah.
yeah, I would tweak it. Okay, with that, I'll accept a motion to temporarily adjourn our work meeting so we can assemble in our general meeting.
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Alright. Okay, we'll see you in just a couple minutes for our general.
Send me a link for the general meeting.
It's the same link.
It's the same link, Jared.
You can just stay on the same.
You can stay